Alfred was born in the royal estate of Wantage in 848 or 849 and died on the 26th of October 899 at the age of 50 or 51. He was King of Wessex from 871 to 886 and King of the Anglo-Saxons from 886 until his death in 899. The epithet of the Great was not bestowed upon him until the Reformation of the 16th century, some 600 years later. He was the youngest of 5 sons of King Ethelwulf of Wessex and his first wife Osburh. At the age of 4, Alfred was sent to Rome, where he was anointed king by Pope Leo IV. This could not have been an anticipatory ceremony, as Alfred had 4 elder brothers and hence could not have been expected to ever become king. That same year, 853, his eldest brother Aethelstan, who had been appointed King of Kent in 839, died, leaving still 3 elder brothers ahead of him in line to be King of Wessex. In 854 to 855, Alfred again journeyed to Rome when his father, King Ethelwulf, took the 2 youngest boys, Ethelred and Alfred, on his own pilgrimage there. Upon his return in 856, Alfred's now eldest brother Ethelbald refused to relinquish the caretaker control of Wessex his father had entrusted to him. To avoid civil war, a compromise was reached where Ethelbald would retain the western kingdom of Wessex and his father, King Ethelwulf, would rule in the east. That arrangement didn't last long, as 2 years later, in 858, King Ethelwulf died, and the eastern kingdom he had ruled went to Alfred's second eldest brother, Ethelbert. 2 years later again, in 860, Ethelbald died, and Ethelbert was then able to reunite the southeastern kingdoms of Kent, Sussex and Essex with Wessex. 5 years later, in 865, Ethelbert died, leaving only one brother, Ethelred, ahead of Alfred. It was during the reign of Ethelred that the Viking invasions intensified. The great heathen army arrived in England in 865 and over the next 5 years conquered all the kingdoms of England bar Wessex. Whilst the Danes succeeded in conquering Mercia, the Mercians bought off the Danes, who at least for the time being withdrew to East Anglia. In 870, the 2 surviving brothers of Wessex, Ethelred and Alfred, made a deal whereby whoever survived the other would inherit their father's kingdoms in the southeast in addition to Wessex. Given the seriousness of the Viking invasion, King Ethelred's 2 sons, Ethelwald and Ethelhelm, were passed over as successors to the throne because they were too young. Ethelwald would later claim to be the rightful king of Wessex and dispute the throne of Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, after Alfred's death. Whilst Alfred's military education was conducted throughout his boyhood, he was not taught to read and write until around the age of 12 onward, but when he was taught literacy, he embraced it with a passion and excelled, and it would become an important part of his wish for his subjects during his time as king. His mother once offered a prize of a book of poetry to the first of her sons who could learn it. Despite being the youngest, Alfred took the prize. Whilst the statues of Alfred at Winchester and Wantage depict him as a warrior-like figure, he was reportedly slight of build, not physically strong, and was afflicted throughout his life with what modern physicians believe was probably Crohn's disease, an inflammatory disease of the bowel, but can affect the sufferer anywhere from the mouth to the anus. Despite his slight stature and physical ailing, Alfred had no shortage of courage, and above all he was revered for his intellect and temperament. As a testament to Alfred's courage beyond attending battles himself, according to Bishop Asser, who was commissioned to chronicle Alfred's life, Alfred once disguised himself as a minstrel to enter a Danish camp to learn with his own ears their plan of attack. Had his identity become known, he would have surely been killed, and the country of England may never have been. It was Alfred's ultimate goal to drive the great heathen army out of all the English kingdoms and unite them into a single country called England, a dream which was eventually realised even if not in Alfred's lifetime. In 870, the Vikings, having successfully conquered the other English kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia and East Anglia, launched an assault on Wessex. Both King Ethelred and his younger brother Alfred marched out to meet them, and the Battle of Reading ensued in the first week of January 871. The Saxons were driven back, but regrouped, and at the subsequent Battle of Ashdown, drove the Vikings back to Reading. 3 months later, in April 871, King Ethelred died, and Alfred was crowned king. Alfred alone was now burdened with the responsibility of saving his kingdom and people from the Viking invasion. During 871, 9 battles were fought with varying outcomes. In May, whilst Alfred was preoccupied with the funeral of his brother and his own coronation, he lost 2 battles, including one at Wilton. The loss at Wilton destroyed any hope that Alfred could drive the Danes out of his kingdom, and so he made peace with them, although the terms of the peace deal were not recorded. He most likely bought them off, and hence the Danes withdrew to take up winter quarters in Mercian London. Buying off the Danes, as the Mercians had done earlier, presented its own problems, as the money could buy the service of men and supplies to build an even greater army. In the 5 years between 871 and 876, the Danes acquired a new leader, Guthrum, who in 876 slipped past the Saxon army to occupy Warham in Dorset, to the southwest of Winchester, thus surrounding Alfred both from the north and south. He successfully blockaded them, but couldn't take Warham by assault, so Alfred made a deal with Guthrum to lift the blockade if Guthrum released hostages and withdrew. However, the Danes broke their oath, and after killing the hostages they had agreed to release, drew back to Exeter. Alfred blockaded them there too. Fortune favoured Alfred when a relief fleet sent by the Danes to break the blockade was scattered by a storm, and Guthrum's army was starved into submission and withdrew back to Mercia. In January 878, the Danish got wind of where King Alfred was staying over Christmas, and they made a lightning attack on Chippenham. Most people were killed, but Alfred and a small band of his people were able to escape into the marshes of Somerset. The Danes made a stronghold for themselves of Chippenham. Legend has it that when Alfred first arrived in the marshlands, he was given shelter by a peasant woman who was not informed of Alfred's true identity. She left him to watch some cakes in the oven while she was away briefly, but Alfred forgot the cakes and allowed them to burn. The woman apparently gave Alfred a scolding when she returned, unaware that she was scolding her king, a scolding which Alfred humbly tolerated. This was the low water mark in the history of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It looked like Wessex would be the final kingdom to fall to the Danes. There would be no England. In the months that followed, Alfred built a fort at Athelney, and from there began to organise a counter-resistance. In May 878, Alfred rode out to Egbert Stone with the fyrds or militias of Somerset, where through a network of scouts and messengers was able to send word to the fyrds of Wiltshire and part of Hampshire. They joined forces to form a great Saxon army that chased the Danes out of Winchester and back to their stronghold at Chippenham. At Chippenham, they surrounded the Danes' stronghold and starved them into submission. Part of the terms of Guthrum's surrender was that he convert to Christianity. What would later become known as the Treaty of Wedmore was agreed upon when Guthrum and 29 of his chiefs were baptised, making Guthrum Alfred's godson. The kingdom of Mercia was divided between Alfred and Guthrum the following year, when King Ceolwulf II of Mercia was deposed. The border between Alfred's and Guthrum's kingdoms ran up the River Thames to the River Lee, followed the River Lee to its source near Luton, then ran in a straight line to Bedford, and from Bedford following the River Ouse to Watling Street. Everything east of that border became the Danelaw. Guthrum became king of an enlarged East Anglia, and the Danes began to settle there in peace. There were skirmishes, but by and large Guthrum was from then on neutralised as a threat. Around 883, Alfred received as a gift from Pope Marinus a piece of the True Cross, a great treasure to the Christian king. As a result of the friendship between King Alfred and the Pope, Anglo-Saxons living in Rome were exempt from tax or tribute. In 885, the Danes built a fortress at Rochester with intent of besieging the city. Alfred sent his army out to confront them, but on hearing of the Saxons' approach, the Danes fled to their beached ships and sailed away to another part of Britain, and subsequently left Britain altogether and sailed to the continent the following year. Not long after, Alfred decided to go on the offensive and invaded East Anglia and retook London for Wessex in 886 and set about rebuilding it. Alfred initiated the borough system, later termed boroughs, fortified regions spaced roughly 20 to 30 kilometres apart that would facilitate quick response to any Dane attacks. In 889, King Guthrum died, and the resulting power vacuum stirred up new ambitions among Danish warlords looking to take his place. In 892 or 893, the Danes fled the continent in 330 ships of 2 divisions and entrenched themselves in Appledore, Kent, and Milton, also in Kent. The larger division was led by the Dane Haystein. The Danes brought their wives and children with them, indicating a meaningful attempt at conquest and colonisation. Alfred took up a position where he could observe both forces. Whilst Alfred was in talks with Haystein, the Danes of Appledore broke out westward, but were overtaken by Alfred's son Edward and defeated at Farnham in Surrey. The Danes were defeated again at Benfleet and rejoined Haystein's division in Shoebury. As Alfred was en route to assist Edward, he got word that the mostly Northumbrian Danes were besieging Exeter again, and headed westward to challenge them. Seizing the opportunity, Haystein struck northwest again, possibly to help their friends who were being driven back by Edward. However, they were met by a large force mustered together by the 3 great ealdormen of Somerset, Wiltshire and Mercia, and were halted. The Danes again retreated back to Shoebury. The Danes then sailed up the River Thames and the River Lee and entrenched themselves about 30 miles north of London. This turned out to be a fatal move, as Alfred then blockaded the rivers and the Danes were trapped. Over the course of 896 and 897, the Danes gave up the struggle and Wessex was saved. When Alfred wasn't dealing with the Viking invasions, he dedicated himself to advancing education in his kingdom. Literacy had decreased, not increased, during the Viking invasions, and Alfred believed that the Viking invasions were punishment from God for not raising an educated population. Alfred set up a court school to educate his own children, those of the nobility, and promising members of the common people. He also set up schools outside the court school and urged that every free man should be taught to read and write. He further believed that the key to winning future conflicts lay in education. He advocated for the teaching of the English language rather than Latin, and he himself, along with his scholars, translated texts from Latin to English. Alfred also tried religious reformation in the hope of inspiring a greater awe of God among his subjects. He built monasteries, but the people showed little interest in adopting the monastic life. As a result, Alfred imported scholars and bishops to man the monasteries. Despite Alfred's deep personal devotion to God, he had no conscience expropriating church land, particularly land bordering the Danelaw, where he gave possession to the thegns and ealdormen who he believed could defend it much better than the church. King Alfred died on the 26th of October 899. It is not known what the cause of death was, but was most likely related to his lifelong affliction of Crohn's disease or hemorrhoidal disease. His body was kept for 4 years at the Old Minster in Winchester, but then relocated to the New Minster, which may have been purpose-built to house Alfred's body. The New Minster moved to Hyde in 1110, and the monks, along with Alfred's body, were transferred to the Hyde Abbey. The abbey was dissolved in 1539 and the site demolished, leaving the graves intact. However, in 1788, a prison was to be constructed on the site, and workmen who discovered the graves stripped the graves of lead and any valuables, and the bones were scattered. Further excavations and discoveries have been made in recent years, but none of the bone fragments found have been proven to belong to either Alfred or his son Edward the Elder, who was buried at the same site. In 1441, King Henry IV attempted to have Alfred canonised as a saint, but was unsuccessful. Nonetheless, Alfred is venerated by the Catholic Church. In the Anglican Church, Alfred is celebrated as a Christian hero, and a feast day to commemorate him is held on the 26th of October, the date of his death. Alfred, King of Wessex, King of the Anglo-Saxons, Alfred the Great.